You know, the romance of the A format paperback, they just don't make them like this anymore. Isn't that fantastic? Sixth Fontana book of great horror stories. Marvellous. Hi, welcome to Outlaw Bookseller with me, Stephen E. Andrews, writer, bookseller, collector. And I knew there wasn't going to be another one this year, but as it happens there is. It's another book haul. It's really more of a sort of day out because it's a couple of days till Christmas. I've been selling books at work all week, been pretty busy, needed a day out. The really cold weather's over, it's relatively dry. I left early because of possible problems with traffic. Buses, trains, but we seem to be okay, so I'm just waiting for the train to Westbury now. And yes, I'm meeting Jules Burt, and so you'll see a bit more book shopping at ZARDOZ. All you need is books. Okay, so here we are at ZARDOZ again, and I've been here for an hour. Jules is looking around as well, and really I've just looked at the list I brought this time, which is different to the list from last time. And I've already put a bit of a pile together, and I'm yet to do like a casual browse yet. Last time I did a browse at the end and made a list from that, so I'm just going to take a break for a moment and have a bit of restorative chocolate, which I have stashed away, and then we'll have a leisurely look about. It's the day after my third visit to ZARDOZ, and I didn't shoot much there this time because I just really wanted to enjoy the sort of pleasure of shopping, and you've seen it in the last two videos. And I will be going again. I probably won't shoot again, but we'll see. Maybe Jules and I will calm down enough after the initial excitement. I say that was my third visit. It was his second. He did some shopping as well, so maybe next time we'll be calm enough to do some shopping and, you know, shoot a bit of a chat as well and get around to that, because we are both going to keep going because, you know, we kind of still scratch the surface and it's great stuff there. So I wasn't planning another book haul for the end of 2022, but as I said, I wanted to get out, and it's been sort of busy at work, and I wanted to do some leisure book related stuff, and I sold some stuff on eBay. I got some eBay sales, and I took some stuff over to Trade with Morris as well, so I was able to splash out a little bit, which was nice. And of course he gives us a discount because we're long-term collectors and customers. If you want things from ZARDOZ, you can't visit unless you're invited. It's all online. The prices are very reasonable, the grading is good, and you know, I've bought from him for years and years and years. He's a great guy, Morris, so thanks again, Morris, for that. So I thought we'd have a look at what we've got, and yes, last time I bought a different edition of Harlan Ellison's Doomsman because I had one of these. This is actually a fresh copy because the one I had was in a real state. This is the Belmont Tower edition from the 60s with telepower from Lee Hoffman, who actually has a story in Again Dangerous Visions, and I bought a nicer one with the Lynn Carter sort of double instead of the Hoffman one. And the one I owned was in such a state, but I was going to get rid of it, and several people in the chat said, oh, don't get rid of it, you know, and I thought, well, I can't now, I'm sort of attached to it. I just wanted a nicer copy, so there you go. Ellison hated Doomsman apparently, and he would sort of tear it up. I have read it. It's extremely minor, even, you know, accounting for his early work. A lot of his early SF work's really good, actually. So there we are. So I'm really pleased to get that. That's from the 60s. So that sort of opens us up in sort of pride of place, really. And I thought we'd kind of look at the books today chronologically, or roughly chronologically. I haven't sort of cleaned any of them yet or brushed them, so we'll have a quick look at that as we go along as well. And here is something that I've been thinking of buying for a while. This is The Girls from Planet 5 by Richard Wilson in Lancer Books. And we'll just sort of unwrap that now. As you can see, some of these are bagged. And this is from, look at that, 3 and 6, the pre-decimal money, so that dates it before 1971. I can't actually get this bag open, so I'm just going to tear it off camera at the moment. So I'm trying to do this while having to sit down because I'm wrecked, because I've been standing up selling books at work all week, what with Christmas coming and stuff. So there you go, The Girls from Planet 5. And Richard Wilson, British SF writer, Lancer Books, 0. There's a number on there. Wow. And let's have a look at that. It's got a purple text block. And I think this must be the first Lancer book. Wow. And 1955, Richard Wilson. I think it was a short story expanded into a novel. I don't know a huge amount about him. I have read up on him and I have read short stories, but I can't remember any of it. So I do apologise. So there you go. So set in the 80s, and I say 3 and 6. Lovely. And great. Unbroken Spine, fantastic for a book of that vintage. And that is me. The Unbroken Spine is my thing, as you will have seen on this channel. Then somebody who I've never read that I can recall, I may have read some short stories, and his work's been out of print for a million years in the UK, I'm just going to give that a bit of a brush, is Robert F. Young. This is a panther. You can tell by the livery straight away it's a panther from the 60s, lovely green there. And there we are. On the back, the Financial Times, the Evening Standard, and Margarita Lasky and the Observer liked it. Margarita Lasky, wow, she's a heavyweight. So there we go. So that's going to be interesting. I do like to try and read up on the obscure people who I don't really know a lot about. And this was a Gollancz hardcover in 66, probably quite rare in Gollancz, and 68 in Panther. So there you go. So that looks like a first UK paperback, very handsome. So that's kind of our 60s tranche, and I've already broken my rule because I was talking, wasn't I, about going chronologically, and something which I haven't had in the collection for a while, and I decided to get it back in, is this book, A Merit, The Moon Pool, which is in all the reference books. Scott Bradfield was talking about the other day on his channel, and Scott and I are going to try and do a link up across the Atlantic next year and talk via Zoom or something, because Scott's a great guy. And I decided to get this one because it's Avon. That cover there, I would say that's Rodney Matthews, great sort of 70s and 80s SF and fantasy artist. Did lots of work, of course, for the rock band Yes, with their covers. It's got a Forbidden Planet sticker on it, 105. So the Moon Pool is, what does it date back to? Gosh, it's an old one. I think it's somewhere between 1900 and 1920, 1919, there we go. And it's deemed to be very influential and what have you. And it's some, you know, he's somebody who, you know, before Gernsback coined the term science fiction, this is regarded as one of the key sort of SF books of that time. So that's one which would fit in very well with the designation of a classic in terms of its vintage. So there you go, The Moon Pool, cracking. I do love Rodney Matthews' work, it's fantastic, just the thing. And again, Unbroken Spine, absolutely beautiful. I would say this is an 80s edition. Let's have a quick look at it. Let me see. First Avon printing 51. This is the third printing. It doesn't say when it was printed, but that to me is very obviously a late 70s or 80s book, I would say. Very, very nice indeed. So I'm very pleased with that. Chuffed with that. That's a great one. Then I go right the way back to the Golden Age proper, and before the Golden Age, with two of my very favourite writers from that period. Probably my two favourite writers from that period, actually, which is C. Elmore and Henry Kuttner, who were partners. She was a typist in a bank when she started writing, and she wrote Shamblo, the wonderful Northwest Smith story, which was published in Weird Tales about 1933. And, you know, she really was important, fantastic sensual writer. And Henry Kuttner, they collaborated with Lewis Paget. It's very hard to tell later in their careers who wrote what. This one, I don't know, Earth's Last Citadel, and this is a really nice ace. Look at that, beautiful. And I do tend to pick up their stuff when I find it. Science fiction from the great years, it says there. So I guess that's the kind of classic sort of thing as well, because me and Graham talked on the channel recently about classic SF, which was interesting. And let's see, 1943, so this is probably a fix-up from a magazine. Obviously there were no SF books then as such, nothing labelled SF. And Kuttner and Moore for me are the best. I mean, to me, Kuttner is the forerunner of Alfred Bester. I think his quality work's really important. He died very young in the 50s, of course. And if you've never read Kuttner and Moore, you know, they really are the best, I think. And this is another Kuttner, Chessboard Planet and Other Stories. And that's in Hamlin. I've got a real Hamlin thing these days. I do love Hamlin SF, late 70s, early 80s. It's got a kind of workman-like style, which I just love. And Kuttner, brilliant. Of course, it's mostly short stories. If you've never read Kuttner, the place to start is his novel Fury, which is sort of up here. I've sort of put some of the text blocks around so you can see the spines, because normally, as you know, I just have the text blocks up for reason of space. And its prequel, Clash by Night, is even better. And I see Kuttner really as being the first person who really kind of sort of brought a literary standard into Golden Age SF. I imagine, you know, you could say Theodore Sturgeon as well, would probably be the more popular choice. But I cleave to Kuttner. I think Kuttner's great, and I think he's underrated and underread these days. Moving on into the 1950s, and the other day I was thinking about Charles L. Harness, and I realised I didn't have this anymore. I don't know why, and this is the Paradox Men in the Master SF series. Again, we're referencing that classic SF video that Graham and I did in our Two Grumpy Old Men Discuss SF series. And I was going to pick up a Robson hardcover of this from Morris at ZARDOZ, and sadly it had gone from his catalogue. It's a shame, so I'm thinking of getting one from the States, because this is a great book. And Harness was sort of very active in the 50s, and he was generally regarded by people like Aldous, Moorcock, what have you, as one of the best sort of literary writers. It's probably 64 actually. I'm thinking of The Rose as the 50s, and he wasn't very prolific. And you know, everybody used to say, I wish he'd write more because he's great. And you know, probably he was good because he didn't write too much, and he stuck to sort of his best stuff. So that's a nice one in the Master SF series. And I've got a few of these, and I'm thinking as time goes on, I'm going to pick up most of the ones which I consider to be important. And there are a cracking little series from NEL there. Somebody who I revisited recently, because Matt at Bookpill talked about his classic novel, A Canticle for Leibowitz, on his channel. Hi Matt, was Walter M. Miller Jr. And it was literally years and years and years since I'd read Canticle. And I recalled that I hadn't read his short stories because he wasn't very prolific. Canticle was his only novel. There was a sequel which was finished off, I think, by Terry Beeson later on, because he died before he finished it, which I've never read. It didn't get great reviews at the time. But then I forgot that I'd read a collection of stories by Miller called The Darth Stellar. This is a Corgi one. And I realised I'd got rid of it. And it was a book where, at the time, I always thought it was quite cheap looking for its time. It looked like an American book, supposed to be a UK Corgi, The Darth Stellar and Other Stories. And this was good stuff. And I think I got rid of it because my copy was fairly naff. And so I noticed Morris had his inventory. I asked him to put it aside for me. And yeah, that's a real sort of cracker, because basically this is one half of a bigger book. There was a complete short stories. I can't think what the title was. And this was the other half, Conditionally Human and Other Stories. It may well be that the actual omnibus of the two was called Conditionally Human. It wasn't an omnibus because it was split into these two collections. And I've never owned this one and not read it. And there's a nice cover for Canticle on the back there. So I was really pleased to find this there as well. And these are from the early 80s. And they're quite sort of 70s looking then, you know, they do seem to have quite sort of old school jackets even for the early 80s. So, but I was chuffed to get both of those, and really great stuff. And he said it was interesting rereading Canticle, or some of it, because I'm a big fan of the first part, but I'm not so keen on the recurrence thing in it. And obviously it's quite a serious book, even though it's written in quite a witty style. So I'm really keen to revisit these stories and read ones I haven't read in there. So that'll be great. So Walter M. Miller Jr., Conditionally Human and The Darth Stellar. There is a Miller collection in Masterworks, which I think is called Dark Benediction, and it's probably all of these. It's probably these two together, so it may well be The Dark Benediction. I'm sure that wasn't the original title though, so I'll have to check into that. These stories are mostly 50s and 60s, and so he wasn't that prolific, and you know, he had a terrible time in the war. He was involved in the siege at Monte Cassino, the monastery in Italy, which I think is one of the oldest monasteries in the world. And, you know, it was really sort of dreadful part of the Italian campaign as the Allies pushed into Axis Europe that way. And I love Italy, as anybody who watches the channel knows. So it's a shame he had such a bad experience there. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to revisiting those. Sort of finishing off on my more old school guys, I noticed this, and it's not a book I knew. Tales of 10 Worlds, 15 Stories by Arthur C. Clarke. It's Corgi again. I loved the cover. There were several copies there, and I wanted to get a really nice one. So I picked this one out of 3 or 4 there, and really, really nice. I just like the colour scheme. And this looks very late 60s. See Corgi, it's got the little Corgi dog there. The old Queenie's favourite dog, of course. Let's see. And 71. So yeah, so again, we're seeing that thing where it's only just a 70s book, and certainly in this printing. And inside the printing history shows there were lots of editions. Gollancz 63, and it was reprinted by Gollancz again in 63, 65. So look at that, Gollancz did 5 editions in hardcover, and the Corgi 171. So that's a first paperback for UK. So that's amazing, really, that Gollancz did 5 printings. It just shows that people would buy books that stayed in hardcover, because Gollancz didn't do paperbacks then. They started their SF line in 62 with The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard. And yeah, and I thought that was lovely. So I'm not a massive Clarke fan, but I do have certain waves of nostalgia about his work. So that was a great one to get as well. So that sort of finishes off my sort of 50s, 60s guys to a degree. And then I'm going to pull a few of these things forward and show you sort of slightly later stuff. And it's funny, you know, like I say, you get rid of books and you wish you kept them. So I have been replacing some things, and this was something I read quite a lot in the 70s. I say quite a lot. I must have read it 3 times. This is Fade Out by Patrick Tilley in Sphere, and normally you find this and it's in a terrible state. This one's not too bad. There's no break on the spine. The colour's reasonably good, so I need to give it a clean. And this copy dates from 82. Published 75. I think I bought mine about 77 when it was the Sphere first paperback. And Tilley is somebody, he's kind of like a forgotten figure now. He had a series of books in the 80s called the Amtrak Wars, which I used to sell regularly. And then they sort of just disappeared completely. But this is about a UFO lands, and gradually it starts to blanket the earth and knock out all of our sort of comms and what have you. As you can see, it's a big book. It's written in a very sort of bestsellery style. And very sort of, and as you can see, it doesn't look like an SF novel. It does, but the most compelling novel of the unknown ever written. So it's written with a mass audience in mind, and I think it did quite well. But it's something you never hear about now. But it was written in that sort of disaster movie, sort of mainstream bestseller type style from what I remember. So I'm going to revisit that, because I wouldn't say it's one of the books that made me. And I'm going to do a video soon called The Books That Made Me, focusing on some of the SF and non-fiction and other books which really sort of I read and read and read when I was a kid growing up, and the ones which I think helped form my taste. Then, talking about the late 70s, this is something quite special. This is Berserker, The Bull Chief by Chris Carlson, and this is number 2 in a savage new fantasy series, as it says. And this is Sphere again. Now, Chris Carlson is, or was, I should say, Robert Holdstock, author of Mythaga Wood. These are very uncommon indeed in any condition, so I was really, really pleased with that. Looks a bit cheesy on the back. And this is sort of really, Shadow of the Wolf's the other one. You just don't see these, and they fetch big money. And Robert, since he died, has become very, very collectible indeed. And you know, he was really good. He was a specialist in that sort of Celtic fantasy thing. He was really into it, and you know, he was a great guy. Met him a few times, and I remember talking to him on the phone when Levondis, the sequel to Mythaga Wood, came out. I was trying to organise an event with him, and he said to me, "You're the first person who's pronounced the title of the book correctly." And before I could say that's because I'm Welsh, he said it's because you're Welsh. So you know, that was great. He was a lovely guy, and because he died very young, which was very, very sad, great shame. And yeah, these are really uncommon. So I believe it's generic sword and sorcery, it looks like, but I'm interested to read that and see. So I was really pleased with that, because that's a real rarity. Super. Then we have a book I have read, Tomorrow Might Be Different by Mac Reynolds. I see it's still bagged. I'll just pop it out of the bag. Now, Mac Reynolds, he produced quite a lot, and he's very interesting because he's generally regarded as the only one of the traditional American SF authors from the 50s to the 80s who was left-wing. We could put it that way. He was openly left-wing and very keen on Marxism and stuff. This is from 76, little utopian novel, and his books almost always have a political thing. And you see, what would be like if the Russians discovered a way to win the capitalistic game and began dumping inexpensive quality goods on the market? Well, that nearly happened, didn't it? You know, after the war came down, they kind of embraced capitalism, at least the oligarchs did. And I remember enjoying this enormously because I'm pretty left-wing, I'm pretty Marxist, but only in economic sense. I'm not sort of, I don't essentially buy the idea that being left-wing is about sort of a lot of identity politics things. I think it's about economics and the workers controlling means of production. So I'm loving all these strikes and stuff. That's me all over. So yeah, so I'm glad to get that again. Another book by him, which isn't so serious, so it's quite frivolous, and me and the good doctor, a friend of mine, used to laugh about this, is Galactic Medal of Honor. The thing is, when you're here at ZARDOZ, you just see these really nice odds that you don't know. I know Chilson, I've got one of his books, but I don't know that one. But you just see all this lovely stuff that you don't know, as well as what you know you want. So it's you know, it's a tough call at times. With this next tranche of books, we're coming more up to date. This is sort of mostly sort of 80s stuff, and we'll have a look at it now. And somebody who I've read some of, and he writes really, really well, but I don't always like his subject matter. He doesn't always pick milieux and sort of things which I particularly gel with really well, but I do feel I want to read more of his stuff, is Avram Davidson, Strange Seas and Shores. Avram Davidson's very active from the 50s onwards, and I just thought this was absolutely beautiful. This is Ace. It's clearly a 1980s book. We can have a close look at it now. It's not one I know. Let's see what it says. Copyright 71, first Ace printing 81, and it's a short story collection, which is great because I've read some of them in anthologies, but I've never sat down and read a collection. I have read novels, so I'm looking forward to that, and I thought that was absolutely gorgeous. I couldn't leave it there. I put down something else on my list which I'd wanted longer, but you know, you don't see these sort of things very often. That's absolutely lovely, so I'm so pleased with that. Beautiful little book. And again, somebody again from the sort of 50s 60s period. A late book by him is Charles L. Harness, again, The Venetian Court. It's got a Forbidden Planet sticker on it, a cover which must have been dated even then. Del Rey, which of course was the science fiction imprint of Ballantine for a certain point, named after its editors, Lester Del Rey, and is it Judy Lynn Del Rey, Lester's wife? And you know, I think Lester Del Rey I have a certain amount of enmity for, because he's the guy who sort of curated Terry Brooks's Shannara series and really sort of helped establish the fake artificial Cod Tolkien trilogy as the standard in fantasy, which has bedeviled fantasy writing ever since and has come to dominate the market for SFF. And you know, generally it's been really, really dull thing. And as you see, I'm gingerly trying to take this sticker off, so there may be some residue on that, so I might come back to that. I'll sort that out. It's a Forbidden Planet sticker. Obviously it went in the remainder box, and it's a legal thriller, an SF legal thriller where a computer is used to make judgments. Never seen it before. Let's have a look at the date again, and 82. Yeah, you can kind of tell that's early 80s, can't you? But yeah, so I thought I'd never seen that. I'll pick that up because Harness, you know, he didn't produce a lot, as I said earlier on. I thought, well, that's unusual. It's in fantastic condition, absolutely gorgeous. So I thought I'm going to go for that. So that and Avram were my sort of surprises, really. But speaking of surprises, this really took me back, this next book, because I'd never come across it. And I'm sure it must have another title. This must be a VT, a variant title, because I'm very familiar with this writer's work. And this is Michael Bishop, Catacomb Years. And let's see, gosh, I can even see, oh, it's let's have a look. Yes, Berkeley, isn't it? Really, really nice. And Bishop, you know, the great humanist SF writer of the 1980s and onwards and before. Lovely guy. And I'd never come across this, and it looks like a utopian novel, but aliens coming and being converted to Christianity. So I think it's a fix-up. of short stories. So I'm just going to pop that there, and I'm going to consult the SF encyclopedia while we speak, because I do have it handy. Got the new Moorcock there. Let's pop that out of the way. And here we go. Clute and Nichols, The Real Thing. And people often ask me what you should go for as a reference book, and I always say this. Now, there is a website which is great and it's up to date. This is come out early 90s, which for me is a period when science fiction started to really lose it. But the beauty of this, because it's finite and bounded, is you can just pick it up. You will learn more about SF by picking this up and reading it at random than you will doing a directed search. So let's have a look. Bishop Michael, and we'll see what it says. So yeah, my feeling is it's a fix-up. So let's just find the entry, and this is the thing, and as I open the book, the right page, I see an entry on Jerome Bixby, an interesting writer, you know, and just mentioning that now. I'm going off at a tangent, I know, but, you know, if you've never read Jerome Bixby's story, It's a Good Life, you should. That's a cracking one. So what does it say about Michael Bishop? Right, let's have a look. Well, yeah, we're looking at all the early ones. Funeral for the Eyes of Fire, aka Eyes of Fire, got that. Transfigurations. Wow. No, I wonder whether this is Transfigurations in a different. It may well be. I've got a feeling that's Transfigurations. I need to do more research. I've got Transfigurations in hardcover. Yeah, it's looking that way. Yeah. Oh, here we go. In A Little Knowledge, 1977, and its sequel, Catacomb Years, fix-up 1979, a theocratic regime repressively dominates a near-future Atlanta, Georgia, until the conversion of some apparent aliens begins to destabilize society. Wow, there you go. So even though I know this book really well, I've sort of never really come across that one, so I'm really pleased with that. So it is a sequel to that other one, which is also quite little known. So that's a great score. Fantastic stuff. So some lovely 80s scores there. Really, really chuffed with that. That's grand news. So yeah, brilliant. I'll have to get the first one now. That's the thing. Anyway, Robert F. Young, I mentioned earlier on. I noticed this last time I was at ZARDOZ. The last Yggdrasil. Of course, Yggdrasil is the world tree at the center of the universe in Norse cosmology. And of course, you have Midgard, Middle Earth in the middle, and the realm of the Aesa and the Norse gods higher up. And this is Del Rey, Ballantine again, and this is obviously a 80s book too. Quite brief, 1982. I like the brevity, and I think this has got an environmental theme, I would say. And this plant is sort of dying and somebody's trying to rescue it, and it's a paperback originals, and it's probably a first as well. Let's have a look. This is the sort of thing that probably doesn't get many printings. Yeah, first edition May 82, so that's a true first and a first printing as well. Fantastic. So yeah, so I picked that up because it was so beautiful. So some great sort of 80s scores there. Then I got a couple of sort of British 80s books which I remembered really well and used to sell a lot, and this is a book which really I would like a hardcover. It's uncommon. I've read a lot by this writer. This is James P. Blaylock, winner of the World Fantasy Award, the Philip K. Dick Memorial Award, and of course he was one of the 3 California Dreamers alongside K.W. Jeter and Tim Powers, who were friends of Philip K. Dick's down there in California in the 70s. Absolutely beautiful, as you see, and Blaylock is really hard to describe. He's basically a fantasy writer. He's very heavily textured, very witty and knockabout. And, you know, let's say The Last Coin, it's about the 30 pieces of silver paid to Judas Iscariot, and one of them is the plot coupon that drives the plot. So somebody has the coins still exist, and they're things of power. So great idea. That absolutely fantastic idea, The Last Coin. Isn't that beautiful? And because I've not been able to pick up a decent hardcover of it, because I never bought it at the time, because I did blow hot and cold about Blaylock's work. He is very original, but if you read too much at once, it's like eating a vat of ice cream. You enjoy the first bit, but then it comes too much. Very sort of sweet and confectionery, but, you know, really good writing. So I decided to get that, and I think that's absolutely beautiful. And it's my beloved Grafton. Absolutely lovely. Great livery. And I used to sell lots of this. I remember it's a trade paperback as well. And this is from 1990. And yeah, they put quite a lot of money into Blaylock and Grafton. I don't think they ever sold as well as they should have. He's a bit of an acquired taste. He's not for everybody. And of course, my friend Les Escott of Morrigan Books did the world first edition of his Philip K. Dick award-winning novel Homunculus. And he also did 2 other books by Blaylock, one called The Magic Spectacles, which is the only edition of a very strange children's book. If you like Lewis Carroll, you'd love it. And also a great book called The Digging Leviathan, which is my favourite Blaylock book, which is sort of Vernian, Paul de Filippo type, very, very witty. If you like Adam Roberts, you probably like it as well. So great stuff, really. So I was really pleased with that because it's beautiful. So I'm going to put that in pride of place on the old podium for you to feast your eyes upon as we move through into the final stages of the 80s bit of this haul. And yes, we get Granada, later Grafton. Again, this is David Mace, Knight Rider, Chris Foss jacket. They did 3 of these, and these are kind of techno-thriller SF. Never read them. Love the covers. Been looking out for them in good nick, because this is a nostalgia buy. And I don't really know much about Mace at all, but I used to shift these now and again. They never really took off. And this copy is from 85. And 85, I started book selling in 84, and 1985 was my first full calendar year in book selling. So this means a lot to me. You know, this was the sort of standard of the jacketing and things then. Granada were riding high. When I used to do my ordering, because of course we did everything on paper then, they didn't have the computers and what have you, the first thing I would do when looking through my SF section was turn to the Granada catalogue and check we had all the Granada SF in stock. So, and this would have been one of those books. Great stuff, absolutely beautiful. So I am looking for the others. There's 2 others in this livery. They were published with the same jackets in the States, I think. In fact, I saw a stateside copy of this at ZARDOZ. I can't think who published it. It was the same livery, which was good. So finally, from that period, and this actually might be a 90s book. This is Rudy Rucker, the 57th Franz Kafka. Now, this is very uncommon indeed. Let me just look at the dating on this. 83, so it's an early Rucker. Rucker's a mathematician, space-time donuts, software, wetware, kind of knockabout John Sladek, Kurt Vonnegut, a bit cyberpunky as well, very chewy sort of style. Again, a similarity to Blaylock in a way. He's not for everybody, but if you like that sort of satirical, Candide-esque type thing, you'd love it. Now, this has got a Forbidden Planet sticker on it as well, which I'll try and remove. This is very uncommon indeed. I've never ever seen a copy of this in any condition. Not that I've been looking out for it, but because it's so rare, because I don't have enough Rucker in my collection, even though I do have mixed feelings about the quality of his work, I'm going to leave that till later to take that off. I decided to get it because it's really uncommon. I love Franz Kafka. So this is really, yeah, it's about somebody who's the great grandson of Hegel. Okay, so Hegel as well. So we're in Adam Roberts territory again. Fantastic stuff. So, and it's Ace. So yeah, so that's a real, you know, real sort of rarity there, a real unusual one. So that and the Chris Carlson Roberts Holstock book are the 2 things which probably excited me the most as rarities out of what I found. So that's great, isn't it? 57th Franz Kafka. You can't go wrong with that. While we're still in an 80s phase, and I'm still in my Hamlin sort of thing as well, Tanith Lee, The Electric Forest. Absolutely beautiful. And I bought this purely because I do like a bit of Tanith. I love the blues on that jacket. And I do love Hamlin in great nick. And this is one of her science fiction novels. Of course, she wrote sort of fantasy, a lot of science fantasy as well, and underrated figure. You know, she was a goth before anybody was. She was Anne Rice before Anne Rice was. And Morris has got quite a lot of her books actually, and I must pick up some more. Lots of the fantasy ones. A lot of them in Door. Huge career, died very young. Great shame. Very striking looking woman. Sort of person you'd be afraid to go near because she was so cool. You know, she was incredibly cool. I probably would have, but you know, that's me for you. But yeah, I thought that was absolutely beautiful. So that's sort of part of my Hamlin sort of fetish line now, which is really, really great. So nice trim. Look at that. I mean, they don't write short books anymore. Short books are often the best. You know, the economy, the sharpness, the style. And then there's a bigger book from the 80s, which I didn't buy at the time. I used to sell this. That's John Brenner, Children of the Thunder. Brenner was, of course, incredibly prolific. He wrote huge amounts of books, and I've read quite a number of them. I've read all the sort of classic ones, the acclaimed ones, you know, the obvious ones, Stand on Zanzibar, Sheep Look Up, Jagged Orbit, all those things. More obscure things like the Shift Key is really good if you want to read a proper space opera. Interstellar Empire is fantastic. There's ones with wacky titles like The Dramaturges of Yan. I've read mainstream novels by him. Did all sorts of things. Very urbane guy. Met him once. He was a fantastic guy. And, you know, he never really sort of had the commercial success he deserved. And this is a sort of 80s one, and he did a few in the 80s. And I never bought this at the time. This Orbit. There we go. Part of Futura. Very, very nice. Nice and thick. Britain in the Near Future. Ecological Disaster, Chemical Waste, Deadly Parasites. I mean, I do love Near Future SF more than anything. And I guess in that way, I'm an atypical SF reader. More of us who are sort of a bit older, or we sort of grew up with the Wyndham-esque Ballard tradition, you know, the catastrophe novel, we really see the value of the near future SF novel, and I still think that's the most important thing. It's the least fantastic, but the most relevant to the way the world is going. So that's great. And again, Morris had a pile of these. Unbroken Spine, lovely. Normally it's the sort of thing you see in a total state, but I say Morris at ZARDOZ had it in beautiful nick. And as I said earlier in the video in one of the titles, you can't visit ZARDOZ. You can only go if you're invited. So, you know, if you're a regular customer over the years, and then he may let you go along, but everything's online. Absolutely fantastic. If it's not on his website or on his bit on ABE, you can always email Morris. He'll have a look and get back to you, because he has a lot of stuff which is not on the inventory. So it's www.zardoz.co.uk. If it's .com, I'll stick it up on the screen, but it's .co.uk, I think. And, you know, it's really good stuff, and he's a really great guy, and he's been doing the paperback thing forever. If you look on Jules Burt's channel on Christmas Day, you'll see Jules' shoot from the two of us going over. I appear in that a bit. It's going to be good fun. And you'll see Jules' haul. He bought some very sort of rare and unusual crime books. So I'm looking forward to watching that, because I sort of really went for it, as you can see, and I wasn't focusing on what Jules was doing. I was very much in the zone, and can you blame me? So there you go, John Brunner. And sort of also finishing off with some 80s stuff is, this is an 80s book. This dates back to the 60s or 50s maybe. Let me just have a look. And let's see, what date is it? I think it's 71. And this is By the Shores of Another Sea by Chad Oliver, which Graham and I mentioned recently in our classic SF thing. These Robson Classics of Modern Science Fiction series, they only did 4 of them in the 80s. In America, they were done by a couple of different companies. I think Crown did most of them, and I think there were 10 or 12 altogether. And I've had a Philip Jose Farmer one for years. There was a second one. So the early ones are easy to get over here. This is relatively easy to get. The later ones are not. And this is about baboons on the African veldt who become possessed by aliens and alien contact. And they're lovely little octavos, beautiful. So I'm buying up a few of these. Some of them you can get quite cheap for about £5. Not the American ones you have to get from the States, which is a bit of a pain. But I've got more of those on the way. So you'll see more of these coming up on the channel in a future collector's diary. But I don't know why I didn't get them at the time. I really should have. Used to sell them. And as I say, you know, they were something I used to sell in the 80s, and many, many great things. Finally, for the 1980s, we have this, The Frozen City, by David R. Scott and David J. Marl, 2 Davids, in Unicorn, which was Unwin's fantasy imprint. Huge waves of nostalgia now as I look at these Mary Danby edited ghost books. And one of these was the very first ghost story book I ever had. And I think the opening story in one of them, The Bus Conductor by E.F. Benson, was the first adult ghost story I ever read. And see if I can find a copy of it here. I did have one a few years ago, and it's a great story. This is the one. Look at that. Isn't that fantastic? Lovely. And what year was that? Let's have a look. I know it's dark in here, but we'll just have a quick look now. So yeah, 72, and it was brand new when I bought it. That's about the age I was. And yeah, fantastic stuff. And the E.F. Benson one really stuck in my head, because that was easily the best one. There's other good stuff in there as well though. So on another visit, I'm going to pick up a few of these, because, you know, they really take me back to my childhood. Great stuff. Now, Unwin did a lot of very different science fiction and fantasy things, some of them quite minor, and by authors who never really took off in the sort of late 80s. And Unwin, of course, had J.R.R. Tolkien then, and they were bought up by Collins, which then became HarperCollins, and Jane Johnson moved from looking after Tolkien and all this wonderful stuff over to Voyager when Panther was dropped. And this is not a book I've read. and it's a fantasy novel, and I've always loved the cover. I've been looking out for a hardback, but they're very hard to find. And as I say, these are sort of people, they did loads of stuff. At some point I'm going to talk to Jane on the channel about Unwin and some of these unusual authors. They did more famous people as well, like Gary Kilworth, M. John Harrison, Cherry Wilder. They did a lot of obscure people too, but they experimented with different liveries and formats, and they really take me back, and I was really pleased with that. And Morris had a few other Unwins there, a lot of which are still bagged like this. I'm looking forward to picking those up in the future, hopefully. So that's a real blast from the past. Not a book I've read, and I should look forward to that, because they had real style. Unwin had really interesting things. And you know, you look at fantasy writing and there's the formulaic sword and sorcery and high fantasy, and you know, you want something different, and they did a lot of different work then. So I think we're going to move on now to the final stage. And in the last haul, I did get a load of anthologies and said I'd talk about them another time, and we will do that. But today I thought I'd share with you the anthologies I bought yesterday as well. So we'll have a look at those now. Nice. This is a big book haul, sort of over 40 books, which is a heck of a lot. And I probably won't do another like this for a while. I'm going to be going to Hay-on-Wye for a couple of nights in January. I'm mostly not going to do a lot of book shopping. I will do some shooting there. I'm just going to have a little bit of a mini holiday with a friend, really, and I might be meeting somebody who watches the channel. And this, I spotted this last time I was there, and last time I did get another copy of this, the 90s HarperCollins one. But this is the American Ace edition of Mirror Shades, the cyberpunk anthology, which is pretty definitive. So this is my third copy. I'm just going to get out of the bag if I can. And one of my great regrets is that when I went to Worldcon 87, you could still get Mirror Shades in hardcover, and I didn't buy it. I wasn't particularly fussed on the cover, which was a plain red livery with the same basic design as this. I can't think who published it, and this is proving to be a real drag to get open, so bear with me. I'm just going to apply the scissor and rab it on, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to stick this David Gerald anthology there for you to have a quick look at, and there it goes. And basically, I didn't buy it because I spent an awful lot of money on books there, and that was sort of like a big boost to my collecting. And it had basically the same cover design as this, with the chrome embossing there, the chrome gilt there, but it was like red and black, and it wasn't particularly good cover. This is actually much nicer, and it's got this spectral or spectrum based livery there, and unbroken spine, and it's Ace. Absolutely beautiful. It really should be in a format, shouldn't it, really, you know? And as Brian Aldiss says, a knowing bunch of guys bristling with rock, pain and octane, edited by the very wonderful Bruce, and Greg Bear's in there, who we don't immediately associate with cyberpunk, but that's the thing. It's not the cliche you thought it was something different. Gibson, of course, Gernsback Continuum, wonderful story, Pat Cardigan, Rudy Rucker, Mark Laidlaw, great guy Mark, James Patrick Kelly, Lewis Shiner and John Shirley, two wonderful writers who I want to talk about more on the channel. That's absolutely gorgeous, and that's very, very uncommon in the UK, and very uncommon with an Unbroken Spine. So that was a major score from this haul for me. I'm really pleased with that. Always wanted an A format one. Absolutely gorgeous. So I'm so pleased about that. But going back to David Gerald, and this is Science Fiction Emphasis #1 by Ballantine, and I would say this is, oh now when is this from? Let's have a look. Can we have a good guess? I would say this is late 70s, maybe early 80s, late 70s probably, and 74 actually. Wow. And I bought this because I do like David's work, and also there's some interesting stuff in there. There's some writers I've not heard of. In fact, looking at those, I don't recognize any of those apart from Felix Gottschalk, who only ever wrote one novel and who's quite interesting. And you know, you get somebody like David Gerald, who's a bit of an outsider. You know, he was gay, also hard SF writer in a way, and apparently a really great guy. So there's all this, and there's Michael Bishop in there as well, absolutely fantastic, and all these obscure people. So you know, very often the obscure people are obscure for a reason. In other words, they're no good, or they never took off. But sometimes you get real gems. You get this a lot with new wave SF. And you find this both in America and in the UK. So it's always interesting to look at those little corners. There might have been that never quite came off, because occasionally you get wonderful little gems. And now and again you realise they did a novel and you pick them up. So it is worth looking at these people and reading at least some stories by them. And I thought that was a really nice anthology, because I'm on a real anthology kick these days, as you can see. So there we go, that was that. Something I'd meant to pick up literally for years. It's not uncommon, there's lots of it around. Is edited by Robert Sheckley, After the Fall, in Sphere, late 70s, early 80s. And, you know, it's alternative visions of the end of the world, as it says. There you are. And I would have preferred one with a more orange spine, but there's no slant, and it's, you know, and usually this is in a state. I couldn't find a sun-faded one. And, you know, there's sort of great stuff in here. You've got Zelazny, William F. Nolan, who's one of the collaborators on Logan's Run, Sheckley himself, Harry Harrison, Farmer, Tom Dish, Bob Shaw, Maxim Jakubowski. Maxim, great writer, anthologist, editor, bookseller, publisher. He's just won an award. Max used to run Murder One and New Worlds in London, and great guy, Deep Ends collaborator. Met him once. He signed a book for me, a Moorcock anthology that he contributed a Jerry Cornelius poem to, and a great guy. And maybe we'll talk to him on the channel one day. And he's had a bit of a tough time recently, Max, but he's a fantastic guy. So good, solid stuff in there from the Sheck, who of course was Douglas Adams before Douglas Adams was, but we won't go there because I'll get angry about how much he was plagiarized by Adams. Now, here's an interesting figure from the 60s and 70s. This is marketed as Panther Horror, Mind in Chains, edited by Dr. Christopher Evans. Now, there's Christopher Evans, the Welsh SF writer, and there's Dr. Christopher Evans, who is a different person, and people often mix them up. So stories of horror from the skulls and map depths. And I would say this is very late 60s, early 70s. Let's have a quick look at it. Now, who was Dr. Christopher Evans? He used, and it does say 14 horror stories on the title page. Panther 1970, so it's an original, it's a first. And he used to appear on TV, and he was the inspiration for Vaughan, the hoodlum scientist of Crash, in J.G. Ballard's novel Crash, of course. And he was sort of a leather-jacketed, wearing sort of outsider scientist figure. Died quite young, very interesting character apparently, quite sort of counterculturally as well. And he did a little bit of writing. He did sort of a lot of TV presenting as well, I seem to remember. He used to be on TV. And this is a famous anthology by him, which I've seen many times, never got around to picking up. And it's got all sorts of wonderful stuff in it. It's got, you know, old school figures like Saki and M.R. James, and, you know, let's see who else is in there. There's another Lady Cynthia Asquith, Ambrose Bierce, of course, is the occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which is Bierce's most famous story. Rather bored to see that again, but I guess then it wasn't as well known as it is now, though Bierce died a very long sort of time ago, or disappeared actually, Civil War correspondent back in the US of A. There's people like Aldous, Sladek, Giles Gordon. Giles Gordon is a publisher and editor, but he wrote some good new wave SF short stories, which I don't think were ever collected. I think he worked for Hutchinson, I can't recall. But, you know, he was sort of somebody who people like Michael Moorcock would have known. And his name pops up now and again. He was interested in avant-garde writing, and he did some good stuff. And there's other things in there, the Sturgeon, Ballard, a couple of obscure names. So that's great. So that's going to be a good, solid, sort of new wave-ish horror anthology, though I bet a lot of it is SF, of course. But there you go. So that was a good score as well, because normally that's in a state, as I say. So that was a great one to see. So I'm going to pull that one off there and pop that next to Mirror Shades in Pride of Place on the podium. Then a little anthology series. I do like a good anthology. It's a good way of trying things out, trying people out. Was Peter Weston. Peter Weston was a fan, basically. He was involved in fan circles, but he edited a series called Andromeda. This is Andromeda 3. I think it ran to four volumes, maybe just three. I think it's just three. If there's a fourth, the fourth is uncommon. And Britain, so late 70s, stories by Niven, Lieber, Watson, Priest, and the original stories, so their first appearances. Not that uncommon, but, you know, there's a David Langford story in there. If you know what David Langford is, famous figure in fandom. Did a newsletter called Ansible, which is now a sort of website, a very witty guy, much beloved in the UK fans. David Redd, the Welsh SF writer. The Cremation by Christopher Priest, which is a great and very, very horrifying story set in the Dream Archipelago. Ian Watson, Fritz Lieber, Darl Schweitzer's probably the most obscure figure in there. And there's even Larry Niven, so even Larry gets in amongst the sort of hardcore literary guys there, which is interesting. So we'll pick that up. I am looking out for number 2. I've got number 1. I want them in good nick. They're quite hard to find in good condition, so there you go. Last time I was at ZARDOZ, I bought quite a whack of new writings in SF, edited by John Ted Carnell, and who edited New Worlds before Moorcock. He quit in '64 and moved on to start new writings in SF, which there used to be 2 or 3 issues of a year as a paperback book. And they're very mixed in their content. Some of it's brilliant, some of it's too traditional, but it is nice to sort of discover these obscure figures only through short stories, and just so you have a taste of them. And this is New Writings in SF number 3. Now this is a reprint from the early 70s, and Jules has been collecting this. Jules say, I'm not buying a reprint. I actually prefer the covers, the reprints. They reprinted about the first 6. The ones I'm missing are the first 11, or I was until I bought this, so I'm missing 10 out of the first 11, and I can get them, but I want them in really good nick with unbroken spine, so that's hard. So I decided to go for this Corgi reprint, which probably dates to about 1970, first published 64, Dobson hardcover. I've got some, they're in hardcover actually, 65 reissued 1970, and nice sort of trippy psychedelic jacket there, eyeballs, spheres, all the sort of great stuff you'd love. Who's in there? Colin Camp, Fred Paul, John Kingston, which is Keith Roberts, John Baxter, who did a biography of J.G. Ballard, which a lot of people didn't like. I quite enjoyed it. Keith Roberts as himself, Dan Morgan, James Schmidt, of course, of the Talsey series and Witches of Cares. So a good mixture of new and trad in there. Fantastic. And isn't that beautiful? Love it. Absolutely love it. So I'm going to pop Evans and Sterling aside and pop that in pride of place. And I'd say I'm trying to get a complete collection. The hardest one to get actually is the last one, because when Ted Carnell died, I think he'd done 22 issues, and they're about, I think it was twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. And then Kenneth Bulmer, also known as Alan Burt Akers, took over. And the last volume, number 30, I mean, there's none in the UK as far as I can tell. Well, there's none on sale via ABE. So I got this as well, another reprint. So actually I got 2 out of my sort of first 11. And this is New Writings in SF6. Do like that modernist jacketing there. Very, very nice. So this is obviously an early 70s reprint as well. 25p. And who's in it? A couple of names I don't know. John Baxter again, E.C. Tubb, John Rackham, and Keith Roberts again. Keith did lots of great short stories, so they're going towards my collection. Am I going to be a completist? We'll see. As I come across them in good nick, I'll buy them up. If I get to like one missing and I can't get one with an unbroken spine, I'll sort of fill it in that way. But it's just a bit of fun really. And as I say, I've got 5, 6 of them in hardcover. I'm not going to replace those with paperbacks. Life is too short, and money is too short, and space is definitely too short. But they're nice to have. I do like anthologies, because sometimes you just want to sort of read something short by somebody you're not familiar with, just to get a feel for their work, and that's the way to do it. So then an anthology series which I've never been that fussed on getting. I decided to get a couple because Morris had them in nice condition, and they're uncommon in the UK in nice condition, is the Door Annual World's Best SF, edited by Door himself, Donald A. Wollheim. Who was, a bit of a hardcore traditionalist. As I've said before, I love the way that Door books look. Everybody does. You can't fault the yellow spine and the lurid jackets and silly looking things. But they're great. They're very lovable. But Door was, an old school sort of golden age type guy, quite conservative. There was that famous incident, of course, when Stephen King had a rejection from him, and it read, "At Door, we do not publish negative utopias, or dystopias as we would call them now." And he rejected Stephen King, and those early books which were rejected, of course, became published later under the name Richard Bachman, and the Bachman books, and when that came out, that was big news in the sort of late 80s when people became aware of that. So this is the 1973 one, and it is mostly fairly traditional stuff. Poole Anderson, James Tiptree Jr., of course, as a new Michael G. Coney I really love. Simak, TJ Bass is interesting. There's a Werner Vinge in there, a couple of people I've not heard of. So that will mostly be a look at the more sort of traditional sort of end, with a couple of exceptions, but you can't fault that artwork. It's just fantastic, isn't it? Really, really great. There's something almost abstract expressionist about it, even though it's clearly meant to be a spaceship. You know, it is really nice. So I also picked up the 1974 one. So if I see these in good nick, I wouldn't really bother with the ones from the late 70s onwards, because they don't contain such good stuff, quite frankly. And they were getting, you know, even then, you know, he was sort of very, very, I was not out of touch, but, you know, he wasn't really swinging with the zeitgeist, I would say. He was more of a traditional old guard. There's some brilliant names in here. This is fantastic. Let's have a look. So we've got Sheckley, Lafferty, Pohl, Jack Williamson, Norman Spinrad, Vadim Shevner, I don't know. He used to do quite a lot of European SF in these, and Morris did have a copy of one of these which was all European SF, and I nearly picked it up, but I put it back because I wanted some other stuff, and it was in a bit of a state. But maybe next time, because I do want to read more European SF, because so little's been translated. Gordon Eklund, Michael Bishop, Simak pops up again, so mostly fantastic names. And isn't that absolutely gorgeous? Unbroken spines, fairly a little bit fading there, but you know, it is what it is. That's life. You do get spine fading whether you like it or not. So nice. We're going to finish with another anthology, and I don't have volume 1 of this, but this is edited by the very wonderful Mike Ashley, who's doing that series of early British SF for the British Library. I should say earliest, mostly sort of early to mid 20th century stuff. Mike Ashley, amazing series of books on history of the SF magazines, a real expert, great sort of guy. And this is the best of British SF 2. Two-part anthology series looking at the history of British SF from the sort of days of Wells and what have you, right the way up to, this is kind of late 70s, yeah, 77. So this is like cherry picking a lot of the great stuff. It's got a good introduction, a little bit of a ripple on the spine there, a bit of fading. And, you know, I've pretty much read all of this stuff. Let's have a look. There's a few things, you know, I haven't read. And it's good because it's got sort of famous names you'd know: Keith Roberts, Michael Moorcock, Ballard, Aldous, Kingsley Amis. I haven't read that Amis story, that's good. Then more traditional people like Colin Capp, Philip E. High, Ken Bulmer, Arthur Sellings, interesting writer who died quite young. A couple of Irish writers, Bob Shaw and James White. And a John Wyndham. The John Wyndham one comes from The Outward Urge, which is not a particularly great book. Fred Hoyle, Arthur C. Clarke. And, you know, what can you say? So I must watch out for volume 1, which is earlier and generally more obscure stuff. Mike did a book a while ago about classic British SF, which is just a fantastic book, and I'm still reading that, and I've learned so much from it. So that's my third ZARDOZ book haul. That will be the last one for a while, as I say, because I'm not planning to buy much there. I will be visiting some other dealers next year, including a very important one probably in March or April, which I'm pumped for, so I need to sort of put some shekels aside for that. And I've got to do some more eBay selling now, because some of my eBay money went towards this. So it's good to build that back up again. Thanks for watching. You'll be seeing this at Christmas. Hope you enjoyed. Hope it helps you relax and get away from all the hurly-burly. And please like, comment, subscribe. Super thanks if you want. There's more interviews coming on the channel. There'll be another 2 grumpy old men discuss SF. The only problem is the lack of time. The ideas are there, it's just the time, and I am getting to everything gradually. So thanks to everybody again this year for your support, and the channel is growing. Stick with me, and there'll be more great stuff to come. Bye for now.